Hey, Todd Dexheimer, Pillars of Wealth Creation. Say, I wanted to talk about some syndication questions that I get, or one in particular. Somebody said, "Hey, I listened to your podcast, which we recently talked about syndicating, but with that, I talked about the preferred returns and some of the other returns that are oftentimes a part of a syndication." And this person had questions. What does that mean? Do you have scenarios of these returns and so on? So I wanted to cover that, and just for you know practical purposes, anything I say here, every syndicator does it a little different. So I don't want to do this blanket statement saying they're going to get an 8% preferred return, and that's what you need to give. You need to give a 70/30, all that kind of stuff. You need to consult with your attorney, you need to consult with your investors and figure out what's best for your group or for your investing purposes. And of course, when you're doing any syndications, you need to have a pre-existing relationship with anybody that's going to be involved in it, unless you're doing a 506c type offering or a public type offering, which now is allowed. Again, I talk with an attorney to make sure you're doing things right. But for our purposes, we're going to use a scenario where we've got $1 million that we're raising in equity. So we're purchasing about a maybe $3.5 million building, maybe up to 4 million, and we're going to raise $1 million. That's coming from our limited partners or our investors. And we're going to give them a 70/30 split, meaning they get 70% of the profit, and they get an 8% preferred return, meaning they get paid first 8% return on their investment. So on the whole $1 million, they're getting paid $80,000 annually. Okay, so they get the first $80,000 of profit. Now, in our scenario, let me see if I can do this here. It doesn't look like I can. I have this all on my screen, but it looks like it can't share. So I'm going to just talk through it. But on this scenario, we got that $1 million raise. We give away the first 80,000. So now let's just say, after all our expenses, our total income, all our expenses, our debt service, all that kind of stuff, and I usually have an asset management fee. So maybe you're charging, let's say you're charging 2% asset management for your sponsor is. Okay, so after all of that stuff, you're now making $120,000. Okay, so if we made $120,000, I give the first $80,000 away to the investors, and so we've got 40,000 left over. So now, how do we split that? We give a 70/30 split. So 70% goes to the limited partners or the investors, and 30% goes to the general partners. So if I'm the general partner, I get 30%. So what's that equal? Well, 30% of $40,000 is $12,000. The other amount, that $28,000, 70%, goes to the limited partners in this case. So the limited partners in this deal, if we made $120,000 in 2018, the limited partners would collect $108,000. They'd collect my 8% preferred return, my $80,000. And then they would collect my $28,000, or the 70% of the $40,000. So it's $108,000. So their return in this case would be 10.8% because they're getting $108,000 on a million. Now, most of the time, you're not going to have an investor give you $1 million. They're going to give you less, maybe 100,000, maybe even 50,000, maybe even 25,000. Depends on what the minimums are and all that kind of stuff. So if they're giving you $100,000 instead of 80,000, they would be getting 8,000, and then instead of the 28,000, they would get 2,800. So in this case, they would still get the 10.8% return. It's instead of 108,000, it's $10,800. Same thing with 50. Cut that in half. They're getting $5,400, which is still a 10.8% return. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, the only other amount of money that we've got that goes to anybody is that asset management fee. And in this case, we set a 2% asset management fee. So let's say we're buying a $3.5 million building, you're probably getting about a 12 to 15,000, maybe $16,000 asset management fee in that case, because that's on the gross revenue, 2% of the gross revenue. So you're getting about, let's call it $13,000. So the sponsor gets the $13,000 asset management fee, and then they get that other 30% on the 40,000 profit that we extra profit above the 80 that we made. So they're getting a total of $25,000 in profit that year for running this property, for putting together and running the syndication. The investors get 108,000 of that. Now the big profit comes in the end, as long as everything was done right. We added value to the property, added that equity. We get that big return at the end. We paid down some of our mortgage. Let's say it's 5 years from now, we've paid down 5 years worth for our mortgage, or maybe 4 or 3, depending on if we have any interest only terms. And then we also hopefully increased value. So maybe we created $500,000 worth of value, or maybe $1 million worth of value, and now we can sell this thing for a lot more. That's always the goal. And then we can split that 70-30 after our preferred return, and truly provide our investors a good, healthy, depending on how you set it up. Maybe it's a 12%, maybe it's a 15%, maybe it's even a 20% return to your investor. But of course, that depends on how you set it up and what you give. Now, none of this, if you're an investor, or if you're a syndicator, or if you're just a listener trying to educate yourself, none of this stuff, these returns, what I'm talking about, should ever be guaranteed to your investors. Okay, if somebody's guaranteeing you these returns, look out as an investor, because they shouldn't be guaranteeing these returns. And if you're guaranteeing anybody returns, well, you shouldn't be, because that's not how it needs to be or should be. So you're never promising, you're never guaranteeing returns. We're always trying to get those returns. So I think I said it already, but make sure you consult an attorney, a securities attorney, not just any attorney. Make sure you consult a securities attorney to make sure it's set up the right way. That's going to protect yourself. And anything that I said on here, run it by your securities attorney to make sure it works for you and your investors and your group. Because just because I said a 70-30 split doesn't mean you shouldn't be giving maybe an 80-20 split, or maybe a 60-40 split, or maybe you have some other type of setup. Maybe instead of the asset management fee being 2%, you do 1 or 1.5 or 3, or you have different extra fees in there that work for you. So you've got to look at the whole investment, and how do you take care of your investors, and how do you take care of yourself. Your investor should be, as an investor, you should be concerned if the sponsor is not making enough money. But you also want to make sure you're being taken care of as well. So it's kind of needs to be win-win. Otherwise, well, why would you trust somebody if they're only making, if I'm only making as a syndicator $10,000 a year, or $5,000 a year, or something small like that? Do you really trust me? Am I really going to be doing a great job for you if this is just kind of wasting my time and I'm not making any money? I mean, personally, I would still be ethical and honest, but I think it would wear on somebody, and I can see a lot of people maybe pushing it to the side, and they would rather be doing other things that truly make them money. So a lot of things to think about, but the great thing about syndication is we can set it up as a win-win. We can set it up so it works for everyone, and we don't have strict rules and regulations. I mean, there are strict rules and regulations, but as far as our setup and our returns and our profit shares and all that kind of stuff, we can kind of set our own rules to an extent, of course, with consultation of attorney, to make sure, securities attorney, to make sure you are doing everything legal, but yeah, we can set it up to where everybody benefits.